Right. Okay, so I am going to talk tonight about the manatee research here at Blue Spring State Park. And like Kim said in her introduction, Wayne Hartley is our main manatee researcher. He's been doing this research for over 40 years, and I had the privilege to join him about 8 years ago. So what I'm presenting is really both of our research, so I definitely want to, right off the bat, give him credit for all the important work that he's been doing researching manatees at Blue Spring over the years. So to get started, since I know we have some people from Florida and we have a lot of people from outside of Florida, I just want to give a general overview of Blue Spring. So this is a Florida state park that's located it's located in Orange City, between Orlando and Daytona Beach. So if you're looking at this map of Florida here, that little red dot sort of shows you where Blue Spring is located. It is a first magnitude spring. You can see this picture here on the left. I actually took that when I was scuba diving there in the summertime. So this is a first magnitude spring, and it's the biggest spring along the St. Johns River. In the wintertime, it is a protected warm water sanctuary for the manatees. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means for manatees very shortly. So why do manatees come to Blue Spring? You can see here on the right-hand side, it is a large aggregation of manatees at Blue Spring. This picture was just taken about a week or two ago, where we had a lot of manatees in the spring run. So manatees cannot tolerate water temperature below 68 degrees Fahrenheit for prolonged periods of time. So although they look pretty big and blubbery, they actually have only about an inch of fat layer. So they cannot tolerate these cold temperatures during the winter time. And that's why they need to migrate to warm water sources. The springs are always 72 degrees Fahrenheit year round, so about 22, 23 Celsius. So in the winter time, that's sort of almost like a hot tub for the manatees. The St. Johns River can fluctuate in temperatures. This morning it was 59, which is pretty cold. So manatees come into the springs for warmth. The manatees will still go out in the St. Johns River to feed. There is no food for them in the spring run. That's pretty much always been the case. They come in there to warm up, to conserve energy, and then they go back out into the St. Johns River to feed. They can go out for short periods of time and then they come back. They can just not spend prolonged periods of time in colder water. And sometimes if it's really cold, they stay in the spring for a couple of days or even for a week without actually going out to feed. So what are we actually researching at Blue Spring? You can see a picture here of me and Wayne in our research canoe doing our morning research with the manatees. So primarily this is a photo ID and genealogy research project, meaning we are tracking manatees and manatee generations over the years. Some of those actually go back to the early 1970s. There are two manatees, Merlin and Brutus, who have actually first been seen and identified by Jacques Cousteau when he made his famous documentary back in the early 1970s, The Forgotten Mermaids. And those manatees are actually still around. So some of them have been around for a really long time. So every morning we count the manatees and we identify the individuals. So we basically take the research canoe and go all the way up the spring run. The spring run is divided into 19 different transects, and we count the manatees per transect. So almost every day I get the question from visitors, well, how do you count them? Well, we literally count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We count them. We don't have a counter. We don't have a clicker. We don't have any sort of electronic system that they swim through and they sort of check in and check out. We do all of that by hand. And we identify the individuals. And manatees are identified by the scars that they have. Unfortunately, over 90% of living manatees have some sort of scars on them, mostly from collisions with watercraft. And this is obviously very good for the research because we can tear them apart, but it's extremely upsetting that the scars are what we have to use to identify those individuals. So to do that, we use scar sheets as well as photographs, and I will show you a bit more about that later. And this data is submitted to the statewide manatee individual photo identification database, in short MIPS, which is handled, has historically been handled by the US Geological Survey and is now handled by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. So our research goes into that database. Other researchers do very similar research in other parts of the state, and all of that is getting compiled in the statewide database. We also record the number of boat strikes during the season. This is very unique to Blue Spring. This is actually not done anywhere else in the state, where we count and collect information on the boat strikes that are happening during manatee season, meaning between November and March. We also record the number of calves and the number of manatees who quote unquote stay the season, meaning we have seen them before December 31st and then again after January 1st. So that counts for having stayed this season. And then, of course, every drop comes with the sad part as well. We also identify deceased manatees. So this is actually something Wayne is working on right now. We get photos of deceased manatees along the Atlantic coast, along the St. Johns River, and then we look at those photos and see if we can find a match to a manatee that we know from Blue Spring. So I've put together an example of a manatee genealogy. I don't expect anyone to read through all of this, but I just want to show you what a manatee family tree looks like. So this is actually a 7-generation manatee genealogy, starting with Manatee Dawn, that was in 1980, and going all the way down to Volusia's calf, Samba. So we keep track of basically the females. The males don't really play part in the genealogies because they don't reproduce. I mean, they reproduce, but they don't have the calves. They don't take care of those calves. So this is a little bit simplified because we cannot always keep track of every single calf. If the calves don't have any marks, anything that helps us track them over more than 1 year, they don't make it into a genealogy. So basically, we have these manatees that get named and numbered, and they make it into the genealogies. So here you can sort of see how that goes. And this is a pretty long family tree going all the way from Dawn down to Volusia's calves. So who is who at Blue Spring? So we have 3 categories basically of manatees. So we have known Blue Spring manatees. Those have a Blue Spring number and a name. So one example for that would be Blue Spring 4. This is Lily. She's a very well-known Blue Spring manatee, was first recognized in 1974. And as you can see, she has a lot of scars on her. She's very easily identifiable. She comes back every year. So she is considered a Blue Spring known manatee. Then every year, when we start the winter research, we also see manatees that we have never seen before at Blue Spring, but they are very easy to identify, meaning they have very identifiable scars, such as this one. So these ones get a temporary U number, which means it's an unknown manatee. It's unknown to us, but it's very well recognizable. So those are manatees that we also send to the statewide database, and oftentimes they're actually matched to manatees that are known from other parts of the state. And then at the end of the season, they get a Blue Spring number, and if they don't already have a name, they will get a name at the end of the season. And then the third category is manatees that are usually just very slightly marked that we think we can keep track of for the season, but not necessarily after that. So they get a temporary seasonal number. So this is one of our seasonals this year's S13421. And as you can see, it has some very, very slight scratches on the tail. They're most likely going to be gone next year. So we can keep track of this one throughout the winter season, but then after that, we'll most likely lose track of it. Sometimes those scars actually heal differently than we think, and we recognize it the next season, at which point it will be upgraded to an unknown and it will get a name and a number. So like I said before, we work with scar sheets, and you can see Wayne here in one of the pictures with his notebook and his scar sheets. So we hand draw these manatees on these scar sheets, and we have those scar sheets with us in the canoe so we can literally look them up. We can carry photos of 300, 400, 500 manatees with us every single day. So we have those scar sheets. And on the scar sheets, the scars are marked, the names are recorded. Next to the name, you'll see the year when the manatee was first identified. So for Nick here, that would be 1978. You also see the number, which for Nick, again, is Blue Spring 1. And you see the size of the manatee. So the M means medium, the L means large, those kind of things. So matching manatees is not always that easy. Scars oftentimes heal and change. New scars may cover older scars, and some scars heal totally different than anything we would have ever expected. So I have a couple of examples here. This is Manatee Moira Rose. She was actually rescued for cold stress during last season, and then rehabbed at SeaWorld and released back at Blue Spring. And as you can see in the photo on the left, she had some pretty identifiable scars down there by her tail. And in the photos on the right, this photo was just taken a couple of weeks ago at Blue Spring. You can see that pretty much almost gone, unless you're right next to them. It's almost impossible to tell. So very, very difficult animal to keep track of over the years. Then here we have another example. This was a manatee last year. We labeled that S6 because we really didn't think that we could keep track of that for longer than one season. That scar looked very superficial, nothing really all that special. But this year, the animal came back. The scar healed very differently than what we had expected. So he was actually upgraded to an unknown U3721, and he will get a name and a number at the end of the season because those white parts of that scar, those are going to stick, and they will help us to keep track of him. And then last but not least, we have here S137 from last year. He got hit at the very end of the season, and his scars basically healed exactly like you would have predicted it. So he was immediately upgraded to an unknown this year, and he'll get a name and a number at the end of the season because, as you can see, those are very easy to recognize and very very wide, very easy to keep track of. So I wanted to throw just one slide in here about our adoption program. A lot of you may already be familiar with this, but just in case for those that are not, it is a really big part of what we do at Blue Spring, because currently 23 manatees of Blue Spring are in our manatee adoption program. We provide regular updates on these manatees. So in the morning when we go out and we count the manatees, we identify them, we look for the adoptees, and then we publish that on our social media. We publish it in our blog on the website. So if you have adopted a manatee from us, from Blue Spring, you'll actually get these regular updates during the winter months because we let you know if we saw it in the morning. So you can learn more about the program at savethemanatee.org/adopt. And what does it take to be included in this program? I get a lot of questions from people asking me, is so-and-so an adoptee, or can so-and-so be made an adoptee? So there's three things that a manatee basically has to meet to become an adoptee. First of all, they have to have some sort of identifying marks that allow us to keep track of that individual over time. You don't want to have a manatee that has basically no marks. That's where we don't really include calves in the program because there's really no way that we can keep track of them. So if you're adopting a manatee, we want to give you honest updates. We don't just want to tell you, well, we saw Annie or we saw Floyd, if we actually have no clue who that was. So that's the number one. Number two, it needs to have a few years of regular sightings at Blue Spring before it gets included, because we want to make sure they actually regularly come back to Blue Spring, so that way we know it's a good candidate and we'll be able to provide updates on them. And then last but not least, they should have some sort of interesting history, because we do write biographies for them. And if you adopt one, you get a certificate and a biography. So we want to make sure we don't just say, well, it's a manatee, it has a scar and it comes to Blue Spring. You know, we want to give you some sort of information about its calves or about its personality. So it needs to have something. So now I want to talk about manatee numbers at Blue Spring. And as you can see here in this graph, from when the research was first started in the 1970s up to today, the number of manatees at Blue Spring has grown tremendously, and so has the number of calves. When Wayne first started the research at Blue Spring, he started with 36 manatees. Last Monday, after we had that really big cold front moving through in Florida, we had 740 manatees in a single day. We have seen almost 800 individuals over the course of a season. So it's a major incline in manatees. So why is that? First of all, like I mentioned before, Blue Spring is a protected manatee sanctuary during the winter time. That means it's just for manatees. There is no motorboats in there. There is no swimming, diving, paddling, any of that, unless it's done under a federal research permit. Now, the park is open every single day, 7 days a week for the public. They can come see the manatees from the boardwalk. But the manatees can just come into the Blue Spring, rest, conserve energy, just be manatees, and they're not bothered by anyone or anything, basically. Also, there are good food sources for them in the area in the St. Johns River. We also have a very good reproduction and survival rate. Usually manatee mothers have a calf about every 2 to 5 years. At Blue Spring, we pretty regularly see manatee mothers calve every 2 years. And they oftentimes actually wean their calves after just 9 months to a year, which is really, really early. The calves seem to grow very quickly, meaning they also mature quicker, they're weaned quicker, and then the females reproduce quicker. So a very good reproduction and survival rate. Like I said, the calves do seem to grow a lot bigger. And we also see some migrants from other places come to Blue Spring. I'll give you a few examples here of those manatees that we now see at Blue Spring that are not originally from Blue Spring. What is really encouraging is that we are seeing quite a few individuals from the Atlantic coast, from Brevard County, from Port Everglades coming to Blue Spring. How they're finding their way there, we don't really know. They may be following, other individuals. They may have at some point visited the St. Johns River, maybe as a calf. We don't exactly know, but we do know that a lot of them come to Blue Spring. This is something we're looking into to get more data on right now, because many of you may have heard what's going on Florida's Atlantic coast. We have an unusual mortality event. A lot of manatees are dying along the Atlantic coast. So it's encouraging to see that at least some of these individuals apparently know these other warm water sites. And then we also get a lot of overlap from other springs, such as Silver Glen, Salt Spring, the Silver River manatees that use those springs as well as Blue Spring. So Gunda here in the lower left-hand corner is one example. Here in the middle we have Hammer. She's a female and she actually had her first calf at Blue Spring this year, which is really encouraging. She's from Brevard County and she really seems to have made Blue Spring her winter home now, and it's looking pretty good. So I want to now transition a little bit from our primary research, which is the SCAR ID and the SCAR identification, as well as the genealogy research, but we also do a lot of other things at Blue Spring. And I really couldn't talk about this without acknowledging the Manatee Rescue and Rehabilitation Partnership, in short MRP, which Save the Manatee Club is a founding partner of. So in this slide, you can sort of see an overview of all the different partners that come together to rescue, rehab, and release manatees. So I just want to make sure we all understand it's not just Save the Manatee Club doing everything. We're not the ones in charge of rescue and release. There's many, many, many partners involved, both on the state and the federal level, all the different oceanaria taking care of rescued manatees and rehabbing them, conducting post-release monitoring and tagging. So this is just a really brief overview. I don't want to go into too much detail about every organization, but just to give you an idea, we're just one part of this really big partnership. So what else is part of the research that we do at Blue Spring? So we do assist with manatee rescue, release, and recovery. We also, in some capacity, assist with post-release monitoring. I wanted to give you a couple of reasons for rescue at Blue Spring. Again, this presentation is really about Blue Spring. I'm talking, I'm giving a lot of examples that are particularly to Blue Spring. It doesn't mean they don't apply to other parts of Florida, but there are other issues going on around the state of Florida that are not necessarily all that relevant at Blue Spring right now, such as the red tide or algae blooms in Blue Spring. So that's why I'm not really going to go into big detail about those reasons for rescue. But we do see quite a few rescues at Blue Spring too, and some of the main causes are watercraft. This is Manatee Leslie. She's also in our adoption program. She was rescued for a very severe watercraft strike in 2018, and she spent almost 3 years in rehabilitation. It was a very, very difficult case. We're really thankful for everything our partners did for her. She was successfully re-released last January, and she's back at Blue Spring now, and Wayne and I even believe she might be pregnant, which that would be huge because she was really struggling in rehab, and if she would be able to now go back to have her calves, that would be really amazing. Entanglement is another issue we're seeing at Blue Spring. So we do have a lot of manatees that have monofilament line. wrapped around their flippers. We had 2 years ago, we had a manatee entangled in a bicycle tire. So this is Manatee Una, also an adoptee who has now been rescued twice for very severe entanglement in fishing line. We also sometimes see cold stress. This is, again, Manatee Moira Rose from a previous slide. So if manatees don't find blue spring in time and they spend too much time out in cold water, they can get this condition called cold stress syndrome. So that's another reason that we rescue. And then sometimes we do have cases of emaciation. This is not very common at Blue Spring. This manatee last year, she had a lot of issues not related to not finding sufficient food, but that's another reason we do sometimes have manatees that need to be rescued due to being emaciated. And then last but not least, we do have orphan calves too. That are oftentimes rescued. So all of the manatees that you see on this slide here, except for a little Ting Ting up at in the right-hand corner, all of those have successfully been rescued and re-released. And Ting Ting is still in rehab right now. She was just rescued in December. She's doing really well, we heard from our partners. So fingers crossed for her. But those are the main reasons we assist with rescue over at Blue Spring. Like I said, we also sometimes assist with manatee tracking and post-release monitoring. This is primarily overseen and conducted by researchers from the Clearwater Marine Aquarium Research Institute. So this is not something that we do. We don't tag the animals, we don't track their movements, but we oftentimes help researchers. So just a quick overview of tracking and tagging, because we get a lot of questions about this, both from people watching our webcams as well as from people visiting. So I just want to give a really quick overview so you can better understand how this technology works. So some manatees, as you can see in these pictures here, they are outfitted with tracking devices, and they consist of a belt that goes around where the tail meets the body of the manatee, a 3 to 4 foot long tether, and then the satellite tag that's attached at the top of that device. And the equipment contains all kinds of things like sonar, VHF, the satellite transmitter, all those kind of things that help researchers monitor where the manatee is going, how it's behaving, and all those kind of things. They are designed to come off if they should get entangled, so they have several weak links. And if the manatee gets stuck on something and pulls, basically the tag will come off. And you can see in the picture here on the lower right-hand corner, there's actually a manatee that has lost its satellite tracking device, and it is only wearing the belt around its tail. And this is what oftentimes happens at Blue Spring. They lose their trackers, and then oftentimes me and Wayne are actually the first ones who see that and who can then call in the researchers and tell them, hey, so and so is only wearing the belt. Oftentimes the tracking device is actually in the spring because they just got tangled in a log or tree, or another manatee pulled hard enough. So we can actually recover that device and give them a call and say, hey, we got the device, and so has lost the tag. So that's how we help with that as well. We can also get some behavioral assessments and photos of these manatees and then forward them to the researchers so they get a better idea of how their manatees are doing. Blue Spring is also a popular release location for manatees. So you can see in those pictures here, this is last year at a release, we carried the manatee down the stairs in a stretcher. They were awaiting release here on the right-hand side, and then on the bottom, the manatee is ready to go back out into the water. And we are actually seeing more manatees being released at Blue Spring right now. And the reasoning for that is that things along the Atlantic coast are really not going well for manatees right now. They cannot find enough food. There are quite a few manatees are starving along the coast. So you really don't want to rescue manatee, rehab it, and put it back into the system. So what they are trying out is to release some of those manatees at Blue Spring, outfit them with these tracking devices to see how they're doing, make sure they adapt to their new environment. So Blue Spring may actually become an even more important release location going forward. And I just threw this link in here. If anyone, if you want to help with those efforts for the manatee rescue and rehab partnership, we have a website, savethemanatee.org/emergency rescue, and those donations go directly towards rescue, rehab, and release of manatees. So I just briefly, I think in a side note, mentioned our webcams, and those are really kind of near and dear to me because the webcams were really the first reason I was hired for Save the Manatee Club to help maintain them. And I think there may even be some people in the audience right now who are watching our webcams and who joined the webinar because the first way they got introduced to us and our work is the webcams. So I really want to talk a little bit about these. So we do have an above and an underwater webcam, and you can see here me and my coworkers are installing both of them here at Blue Spring. And they're really a great education and entertainment tool for the public. You can watch them live at manateetv.org. This is a partnership with explore.org. So sometimes we record very fun scenes, like you can see in the picture here, manatee and an alligator on a log. So for those of you watching them regularly, you'll probably come across some of those fun things to see. But in addition to this being a really cool tool for the public that they can enjoy no matter where in the world they're located, the webcams have also really helped us with our research. And this is something that a lot of people don't even realize when they're watching the webcams. You know, they're not just out there to stream fun content, but they're really a helpful tool for our research. So what have we learned from those webcams, through the webcams over the years? First of all, we have gathered additional sightings of manatees for the photo ID research. So oftentimes the manatee will go by the webcam and we get a really nice photo that we can use for the SCAR catalog that we didn't even get in person. So one thing I should probably add is that when we go out in the morning and we do our roll call of the manatees, we have a GoPro on an extendable pole that we can lower into the water and get photos and film of the manatees. We do never get into the water with the manatees. We do not have a permit for that unless we have to help with the rescue. Then we have to get into the water. But other than that, we are on the canoe. We're trying to be as non-disruptive as somehow possible. So we have a small camera on a pole that we can stick into the water and get really high resolution photos of these manatees. But the webcams help us with that as well. They also help us with monitoring specific behaviors, especially if it's behaviors that are really hard to observe and to document in person without disturbing the manatees. And I'm going to give you some examples of those. We also collect observations of manatees of concern, again, without having to get in the water. Oftentimes the webcams will film certain things that we can then pass on to our partners, and that will then help to make a decision. Does this manatee need to be rescued, or do we just need to monitor it a little bit more? So those kind of things. So one example was manatee Swale. He had suffered from a moderate boat strike. You can probably see it just a little bit here in this picture. He has some pretty deep prop wounds there on his right-hand side. And every morning we saw him doing our research, he was pretty much lethargically sitting at the spring head, wasn't really moving all that much. And we were really on the verge of getting him rescued. Well, every afternoon on our above water webcam, he came by chasing female manatees, which pretty much showed us that he was most likely going to be okay, and he turned out just fine. The wounds actually healed. So I guess in the morning he was just tired from his afternoon activities, but he didn't need a rescue. So that was really something we would have never known had we not had these webcams. We also had a side swimmer, Badavsh, if I pronounce that correctly. Sorry, Wayne, if I don't. But he had very severe buoyancy issues, was a sinker, so he was very bottom heavy, had a really hard time coming up for air. And when he would come up to the surface, take a breath, and then swim away really quickly, and then, sort of sink down somewhere else. So documenting that in person while on the canoe was extremely difficult. So this was something that our webcams were able to document. And again, every time we see anything of concern, that's immediately passed on to FWC to evaluate for rescue. We don't keep any of that information to ourselves. It's always shared with them to determine, if intervention is needed. We also, once again, here's Moira Rose with her cold stress. We already knew she had pretty severe cold stress, and the rescue was definitely being planned. But then she swam by our underwater webcam and she rolled over, and you could see she was heavily pregnant, very pregnant. So this is again something that informs decision making in terms of, okay, we need to rescue her immediately, and we also need to be especially careful during the rescue, because we're not just rescuing one manatee here, we're also rescuing an unborn calf. So again, something we would have probably not really known had we only had our GoPro footage from the morning, because we didn't get the underside, we just got the cold stress on the top. So again, very important. And then last but not least, here manatee Schwinn, I mentioned him earlier. That was a manatee that was entrapped in a bicycle tire. 2 winters ago, we made several rescue attempts with our partners. Unfortunately, we were not able to catch Schwinn at all, but he came back last season during 2020 and 21. And the webcam actually was the first to catch him, and we were able to see that the tire had actually come off. So we didn't see that in person. We first saw that on the webcams. So again, a good example how the webcams were really an advantage to the research. So very briefly, I want to mention how are the blue spring manatees doing right now? You know, we're hearing a lot about manatees dying in Florida, record mortalities, which is the case. It's a very unfortunate situation. The Florida manatees are not doing great right now, but blue spring is sort of a little bit of a different situation. So I just want to talk a little bit about that so it gives you a little perspective of what's going on there. Like I said, we had a record count of 740 manatees in one single day at Blue Spring during this season, which last year the record high was 624 in a day. So that's an increase by over 100, which is it's pretty amazing. And overall, the manatees at Blue Spring look really healthy. We don't really see we see a couple of skinny manatees, but we don't see anything emaciated. We don't see any of the ones, you know, showing skulls and ribs and all of that. We also see a lot of calves. We have a record number of calves again this year, over 70 calves. So that's going really well. One of the reasons is also that there is actually a moratorium in effect between October and March around in the Blue Spring area where no vegetation removal is allowed. So even invasives, all of those plants are left in place for the manatees to eat. There's no spraying, there's no mechanical harvesting, none of that. So that's a protected area for the manatees' food sources. Right now, we do see a sufficient amount of floating vegetation in the vicinity of Blue Spring, which that's pretty encouraging. But there are concerns with the loss of submerged aquatic vegetation. So freshwater eelgrasses, that's the equivalent basically to the seagrasses you would see on the coast. And we have lost almost all of that vegetation in the St. Johns River. The reasons for that are not fully understood yet, but it is something that we and fellow researchers are extremely concerned about, especially as we are seeing a growing manatee population at Blue Spring, manatees from other areas of Florida coming to the St. Johns River. So we want to make sure this system can actually support the growing number of manatees. So if we're talking about it's supporting 700 manatees, can it support 1,000, 1,500, 2,500? We don't know. So this is something we are keeping a very close eye on and working with various partners. So it's not all a rosy picture. I just want to throw in that in general, right now, they're doing really well, but we definitely have to be cautious about how they're doing going forward. So everything I've presented up to this point was about the winter research that we conduct at Blue Spring during the manatee season, meaning between November and March. So I just want to wrap this presentation up with just talking a tiny little bit about the research that we conduct during the summertime, which is not nearly the same amount we do during the winter time, but it has become quite significant. So I wanted to at least mention it. So in 2016, we started collecting manatee summer sightings. And as you can see, they have pretty steadily increased over the years. Now, 2020, we had some issues with the webcams between September and November, so there were less sightings. So you kind of have to take that into consideration. Most likely would have been a pretty steady increase overall. So more manatees started to frequent Blue Spring in the summer months. And we started gathering data both from our above water webcam that was on during the summer months for the research. It's not live streaming, but we're still able to gather sightings and also in-person sightings. So possible reasons for the increase of sightings during the summer months was that Blue Spring is a protected area. I mean, in the summertime, you know, people can swim and kayak and do all those kind of things in there. But again, there's no motorboats allowed in there. So it's still more of a protected area than, say, the St. John's River per se. It is also a calving ground, so we do see pregnant females coming into Blue Spring and actually having their calves in Blue Spring, or they have them very close by, and then when they're still very small, they keep bringing them into Blue Spring, sort of to get out of the way of the boats, and also to, I guess, show them, you know, where the spring is. Also because we have been seeing an increase in the population in the upper St. John's River in general, so I think it makes sense that if we see more manatees in the winter, we're going to see more in the summer. And then last but not least, curiosity. A lot of manatees are very curious, especially the juveniles. And we have a feeling that some of them literally just come in there to check out the people during the summertime. They're not going to come in the hundreds. They're going to, you know, they come in and they go out. So the sightings that are listed here is basically just how many times a manatee has been seen. And this past summer, we actually saw over 1,000 manatees in the course of the summer. And that's pretty significant, at least to me. And because we've seen so many manatees, we also established a manatee observer program at Blue Spring, a volunteer program. That's I'm co-leading the program along with the park staff, Volusia County, and the Clearwater Marine Aquarium Research Institute. So we're taking turns and we're managing these volunteers. We have a pool of about 60 volunteers right now, and if there's anyone in the audience who is a volunteer, I cannot even express my gratitude towards these volunteers who are literally covering shifts during the summer heat from the kayak or the boardwalk, educating people about manatees, preventing harassment, and helping me gather that summer sighting data. So huge thank you if there's any of you guys out there watching. It's a huge help. And if you are interested in the program, you can go to our website, savethemanatee.org/volunteer, and you can find out some more information. And then just last but not least, a few quick examples of the things that we have seen at Blue Spring during the summer months because of our webcams and because of the sightings that we've gotten. So in 2018, this manatee here came by on the webcam, and neither Wayne or I had any idea who that was. And we submitted it to the statewide database, and they told us it was 3-notch, a manatee that had actually not been seen at Blue Spring in over 23 years. So Wayne saw it way back in the day, but he had not seen it since. It had gathered a whole bunch of new scars, had a long sighting history in Miami, and then sadly died the following December down in Miami, which was very interesting. We would have never even known this manatee was still coming back to Blue Spring had it not been for the webcams. So very, very strange. Didn't come during the winter time, but apparently came to Blue Spring during the summer. Also, Manatee Amber, she was a really big female. She had a lot of calves, and she, in the summer of 2017, had this pattern of coming into Blue Spring pretty much every morning at exactly 11 a.m. It was almost like clockwork. It's a little strange, but this actually gave us a lot of data on the rapid growth of the calves. You may wonder, earlier I said the calves are growing really quickly at Blue Spring. Well, how do I know that? I mean, I'm not standing there with measuring tape, right? So with some of them, we know when they're born, or we see them coming in with their tiny little calves. And if they keep coming back, like even if they're only coming back once a week or every 2 weeks, if we document that, we can actually get a timeline of how fast these calves are growing. So that's, again, something that the webcams were able to provide for us. And Amber is just one example. And then last but not least, I have Phyllis. She's also an adoptee, was born in 1985 and belongs to a really long genealogy of manatees at Blue Spring, had at least 16 calves by now. And she keeps coming into Blue Spring usually about a week or so before she is ready to have her calf. And she's known to have her calves at Blue Spring in the middle of the summer at the spring head. So when we see her coming in and out on the webcams pretty regularly, we almost know it's time for her to almost have that calf. So that gives us a lot of information and helps us and the park staff make informed decisions of, you know, potentially roping off parts of the spring run so she can have her peace and quiet to have her calf. Again, this is something we really wouldn't know without the webcams. So this is a really cool tool to sort of know these things as well. And with that, I will turn it over to any questions from the audience. I put my contact information on here, so in case you have any follow-up questions, if I'm not able to address all of them, I think I have about 15 minutes left to take questions. But if you have anything else or anything you don't want to ask right now, you can certainly direct them to us and to Wayne as well. Again, I want to acknowledge Wayne for literally everything he does and everything he's taught me, because he's really our main researcher and I'm his assistant. So we work very closely together. And if there's any questions you have particularly for Wayne, I can certainly pass them on as well and have him get back to those. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and see if there's any questions.
And these are our list of partners for the MRP.
Yeah, and you can also, sorry, I should have put this on there, but if you go to manateerescue.org, you can learn more about the MRP and about the partners, and it also has exactly this slide on there. So in case that, you know, for some reason you need more information about the MRP, like Tiara said, I can probably talk for hours about specific things. So I wanted to keep it pretty close to the Blue Spring research, but feel free to go on that website and you can see that as well.
So Cora, how long does it take you to count all the manatees, to do your counts every day?
That's a good question. I get that question a lot too. So it can basically take anything from 30 minutes to 4 hours, depending on how many manatees are there. So, you know, the colder it is, the more manatees will be there. We had days where it's pretty warm and we literally have like 2 or 3 manatees, so it won't take me all that long to count them. But on days when we have, you know, over 500 manatees, and we don't just count them, like I said, we also identify them. So it actually takes us quite a while to sort of paddle through all of that and, you know, identify individuals. And if on top of that we have to monitor somebody's behavior, then it can take even longer. So.
And my coworker Kim and I went out with Cora when she did one of the counts, so we can attest that it does take quite a while, but it's very awesome. How long do the manatees typically live in Blue Spring? Like, what age do they get to?
Yeah, good question. So manatees in general can live over 60 years of age. The oldest living manatee that we know of was 69. Now, I did say that some of the manatees that we see today were first identified in the 1970s when Jacques Cousteau made his documentary. So if you do the math, if we first saw them, let's say 1970, they're probably right now in their 40s or 50s, potentially older. I mean, because they were not calves when they were first seen. So they could be in their 60s. We don't know for sure because we don't have the exact birth date for any of them. But I feel at Blue Spring, we do see quite a few older animals. Also, some of the ones that are coming from the East Coast, we've been told, you know, they have a really, really long sighting history on the East Coast before they ever came to Blue Spring, meaning, you know, they're not little juveniles.
Have you ever been tipped out of the boat by a manatee?
Good question. So Wayne has been thrown out of the boat twice. That was before I came along. I have not yet, but I have had the canoe sideways. I have had all of my research gear fall into the water. We have some juvenile manatees that love to play with the canoe. They get very close. Obviously, we try to be very, very hands-off with them. We don't want them to approach. And unfortunately, what oftentimes happens if you canoe over them and they don't realize you're there, and they come up for a breath of air, you know, because they're mammals, they have to breathe, and they accidentally, you know, hit their little head on the canoe, which, you know, doesn't hurt them as such, but it startles them. You know, same thing if you run into something. And if one manatee startles, unfortunately, it's like someone yelling fire in a closed space and everyone suddenly runs without really knowing if there is a fire or anything else. And if a 1,000-pound animal starts to run and multiply that by 50, you get a tidal wave. So unfortunately, that does happen. We try to minimize that, but sometimes it's almost impossible.
Do any of the manatees, are they bothered by the tags that are attached to them?
Usually not. The manatee tags are designed in a way where they seem pretty cumbersome and pretty heavy, but if you compare the equipment to being on a manatee is almost like if we carry our cell phone in a pocket. That's like a weight, sort of a weight comparison. So they're usually not bothered by them. They sleep with them, you know, that they can mate, they can sleep, they can feed, that it doesn't really bother them. Now, sometimes other manatees will start playing with those tags. I can say that probably doesn't bother them because, you know, the manatee's trying to rest and then someone else comes and plays around with the tag. That might get a little annoying, but overall, it seems to be a pretty good way to keep track of them and not to interfere with any of the natural behaviors.
Let's see. How many satellite tags do you typically see in a day?
Yeah, that's a good question too. And that really changes from season to season. This year, right now, we actually have 6 tagged manatees at Blue Spring, which that's the most that I have ever seen at Blue Spring. And I hear that next week there's at least 2 or 3 more manatees that are being released at Blue Spring. So that means we're probably going to get 2 or 3 more tags. They're all color coded, so we know who is who. And usually, you know, only the manatees that need the tags that are tagged. So they're tagged for multiple reasons. Either way, they are part of a specific research study, or they are manatees that are relocated. So they want to make sure they adapt to the new habitat, or the manatees that were rescued as really, really tiny orphans. So they get these tags because they want to make sure that these manatees know how to come and go. So right now we have 6, and I think probably by the end of next week, we're going to have 8 or 9. So that's the most that I've ever seen. In a day, it really depends. You know, sometimes some of them are out feeding in the morning and then they come back. So right now, it's been pretty cold the last couple of days. So we've pretty consistently seen 5 or 6 of them every morning.
Yes, and I'd like to just add that because there are manatees being rescued and there's been an increase in the number of manatees that have been rescued, there are more animals with tags at Blue Spring than typically. As Cora said, it's more than she's ever seen. Typically, when they get tags and they're released all throughout the year or things like that, then their tags will be anywhere the manatees are because they'll spread out. So at this time, because it's been cold and the manatees are all aggregating in one place and they're being released at Blue Spring, that's why we're seeing a lot of animals with tags.
Yeah, good addition. Yeah.
And yes, this video is being recorded and it will be posted soon after, not right away, but we will be posting it soon after. So if you did miss something or want to rewatch it, it will be available. We also have a presentation we gave a couple of weeks ago on the events in the Indian River Lagoon. So if you'd like to learn more about what's been happening over there and why there's been a loss of seagrass and what's being done to help manatees, we have that recording as well, and you can request it through our website.
And we also had a previous webinar talking about how to spot sick and injured manatees. So, and how a rescue is conducted, those kind of things. So if you're specifically interested in those, that's also available on our website. I believe the link is savethemanatee.org/webinar, but I'm going to have to check on that. But yeah, just drop us an email if you're interested in that, and we'll make sure we look up where it's located.
I see one.
On to the next question. I just wanted to ask that those of you who have your hands up, if you don't mind putting your questions in the chat, that would be very helpful. If it is something that you need to speak with us directly about, we'll give a couple minutes towards the end of the presentation, but our preference is for you to go ahead and put those in the chat so everybody can see responses to your answers and help us get a little bit more smoothly through the presentation.
So I saw a question about the supplemental feeding. There is a supplemental feeding trial going on right now. The FWC is partnered with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service over in the Indian River Lagoon, and there is a supplemental, meaning that the food isn't meant to replace all of the seagrass that's been lost in the lagoon, but it's meant to help the animals get through this colder weather in order for them to leave these warm water sites and spread out throughout the rest of the state where there is more food. And this has been targeted in the northern Indian River Lagoon. And you can learn more about that on the FWC's website.
There are a few questions about manatee adoptions, which I believe we put the link to in the chat. and it's on our SaveTheManatee.org website. As far as sightings go, Wayne does give us updates periodically about the adoptees that he's seeing at Blue Spring. And then these are wild animals, so for the most part, we can't guarantee that you would see them if you came anywhere in Florida. But it is good to, we have those scar charts. So if you think you've seen one that we might have seen before, we have that information available to you. There are some there's one captive adoptee in Homosassa Springs, and that adoptee is on the west coast of Florida. Cora, are you correcting me? Are there two of them?
Yep, two.
Okay, yeah.
Betsy and Ariel, yeah.
Yes, and they would be at Homosassa Springs State Park on the west coast of Florida.
And during the summer, so right now, Homosassa Springs is open to the wild. So there are wild manatees that go in during the winter because it is a warm water site. And then during the summer, these manatees spread out and don't use that area. So it becomes closed and the resident animals are let back into the main area of the spring. And then you'll be able to see them on our webcam if they're out there. Right now, you'll be able to see wild animals, and that's the same. You'll be able to see wild animals on our webcams. And sometimes you can see the adoptees on the webcam, but they are really smushed in there right now. So it can be pretty difficult to identify the specific animals. That's why the experts do it.
Try to.
Yep. And I think we're going to end here. Thank you all for your wonderful questions. This will be recorded and we will be releasing the recording shortly. So